What if I told you the most powerful thing you can say when a woman pulls away is nothing at all? Most men panic. They text, they call, they demand answers. Why is she distant? Did I do something wrong? Can we fix this? But here's the truth that separates boys from men. When she pulls away, your silence speaks louder than any words ever could. When you stay silent, you don't lose control. You prove you have it. And in today's video, we're going to break down exactly what happens when you hold that silence. How it shifts the dynamic, reclaims your value, and forces her to see you differently, without you lifting a finger. Let's get into it. Number 1. You shift from predictable to mysterious. She expected a reaction, maybe a double text, a call, or a question like, "Did I do something wrong?" Because that's what most men do when they feel a woman pulling away. They become predictable, easy to read, and even easier to control. But when you respond with silence instead of emotion, you shatter that expectation. Suddenly, you're not the man who panics. You're the man who disappears into calm. And that silence, it wasn't part of her plan. This is where mystery begins. When you don't give her the reaction she anticipated, you force her to reevaluate everything she thought she knew about you. That predictable version of you, the one who was always available, always responsive, is gone. Now she's left wondering, why isn't he chasing? Why is he so calm? And curiosity, once sparked, is a powerful thing. Marcus Aurelius said, "Be like the rock that the waves keep crashing over. It stands unmoved, and the raging of the sea falls still around it." That's exactly what happens when you stay composed while she expects chaos. Your calmness becomes unsettling, not because you're doing anything, but because you've stopped doing what she was sure you would. You've become unpredictable, and unpredictability breeds attraction. Think about it. People are drawn to what they can't easily figure out. When you were always reacting, always explaining, you were an open book. But now, your silence turns pages she can't read. Here's the key. This mystery isn't an act. It's the natural result of mastering your emotions and no longer feeling the need to prove your worth through constant reassurance. You're not silent to manipulate. You're silent because a man anchored in Stoic discipline doesn't let external behavior dictate his inner peace. So, while she's busy analyzing your stillness, you remain focused on yourself, on your growth, your purpose, your path. And that's exactly what makes you stand out. You've shown that you're not driven by fear of losing her attention. You're driven by a deeper respect for your own energy. If this resonates with you, let me know your thoughts in the comments. How have you seen the power of calm silence play out in your own life? Or simply type, "My calm is my power," to remind yourself and others that real strength isn't loud, it's steady. And if you're finding value in this, don't forget to like the video. It helps spread this message to more men who need to hear it. Now, let's move forward and uncover what happens next when you embrace this quiet confidence. Number 2, you force her to sit with her own doubts. When you don't rush to fill the silence, something powerful happens. She's left alone with her thoughts. No comforting messages, no validation, no "Are you okay?" to ease the tension she created. Instead, she has to face the very thing most people try to avoid: her own doubts and the consequences of pulling away. When you choose silence, when you choose restraint, you're not being cold, you're being wise. You understand, like any true Stoic, that every person must wrestle with their own choices. You didn't cause her to pull away, so it's not your job to rescue her from the feelings that follow. If every time she creates distance, You respond by closing the gap. She never feels the weight of her decisions. She never questions if pulling away was the right move because you're always there, ready to patch things up. But when you remain still, when you don't chase, you create a space where reflection must happen. This is where doubt creeps in. Not because you said anything, but because you didn't. Your silence becomes a mirror, forcing her to see her own actions clearly, without distraction. It's no longer about you trying to prove your worth, it's about her realizing she might have underestimated it. But here's the important part. You're not waiting. You're not holding your breath, hoping she'll come to some grand realization. You've simply accepted that her reflection is her journey, not yours. You're focused on living with purpose, maintaining your inner peace, and respecting yourself enough not to interfere where you're not needed. By doing this, you show strength few men ever do. The strength to let someone feel the consequences of their own behavior without rushing in to save them. And whether she reaches out or not becomes irrelevant. What matters is that you upheld your dignity, your calm, and your control. So remember, when you don't fill the silence, you're not creating distance. You're creating space. Space for her to think. Space for you to grow. And space for the truth to surface. Because real reflection only happens in stillness, not in noise. Number 3. Emotional leverage quietly shifts to you. By staying silent, you communicate something far more powerful than any words ever could. I don't need your attention to feel whole. And that message hits differently. It's subtle, but undeniable. In a world where most people seek constant validation, your silence becomes a declaration of independence, a quiet confidence that says, I am enough, with or without you. Epictetus wisely said, only the educated are free. But he wasn't talking about academic degrees. He was speaking about those who've educated themselves in mastering their emotions, in understanding what truly belongs within their control. When you embrace that Stoic mindset, you free yourself from emotional neediness, from the desperate urge to fix, to chase, or to fear losing someone who chose to pull away. And that's when everything shifts. Without raising your voice, without sending a single text, the balance of emotional power tilts in your favor. Why? Because true leverage comes from not needing. When she senses that you're not sitting around waiting, that your sense of worth isn't tied to her response, it changes how she perceives you. You're no longer the man trying to hold on. You've become the man she realizes she could actually lose. Most men don't understand this. They think silence is passive. But in reality, when done from a place of strength, silence is active power. It shows restraint. It shows that you are governed by principles, not emotions. You're not reacting to every pull or push, you're anchored. And that's exactly what creates attraction and respect. Imagine this. She pulls away, expecting you to seek reassurance, to prove yourself, to chase after the connection. But instead, you stay composed. Days pass, weeks even, and you remain focused on your life, your growth, your peace. That's when the realization dawns on her. You were never dependent on her attention. You enjoyed her presence, but you didn't need it to validate who you are. That kind of freedom is rare, and people are drawn to what they can't control. Your emotional detachment, rooted in self-respect, not bitterness, becomes impossible to ignore. Suddenly, she's no longer thinking, I can come back whenever I want. Instead, she's wondering, did I misjudge him? Has he outgrown me? Did I lose a man who doesn't chase because he doesn't have to? In the end, emotional leverage isn't about control over someone else. It's about control over yourself. When you no longer fear losing what isn't fully yours. When you're content walking away with your dignity intact, that's when you hold the real power. And you don't need to announce it. Your silence says it all. Number 4. Your value increases through absence. People don't miss what's always there, because what's constant becomes invisible. It's human nature. When you're always available, always responding, always showing up, your presence starts to feel expected rather than appreciated. But the moment you step back, when you remove your presence without drama or explanation, that's when she starts to feel the difference. That's when she realizes that your attention was never a guarantee. It was a gift. This is where absence becomes your silent ally. By pulling back, you create space, not just physical space, but mental space in her mind. Suddenly, the messages stop. The familiar comfort of knowing you're just one call away disappears. And that's when your value begins to rise. Not because you did something, but because you chose to stop doing everything. Seneca once said, "We should give as if we are lending, not throwing away." Your time, your energy, your presence. These aren't things to be handed out from fear of being forgotten. They should be offered from a place of strength, of deliberate choice. When you live by that principle, you stop showing up just to maintain connection. You show up because you decide it's worthy of your presence. The most desired things in life are scarce. When you remove yourself, when you stop being overly accessible, you tap into that same principle. Your absence creates a void, and that void makes her reflect on what she had but didn't fully notice. But remember, this isn't about pretending to be busy or creating artificial distance. It's about genuinely living in alignment with your own standards. You're not withdrawing to spark interest. You're simply no longer offering yourself where you're not valued. That quiet withdrawal speaks louder than any words ever could. And over time, she'll feel it. She'll remember the conversations, the way you carried yourself, the energy you brought into her life. Because now, with your absence, those memories gain weight. What was once overlooked becomes something she starts to crave. Not because you forced it, but because you understood a simple truth. What is always present is rarely appreciated. So, by stepping back, you elevate your value. Like a Stoic, you give your presence with purpose, never out of fear. And that kind of man, the one who knows when to walk away gracefully, will always be far more attractive than the one who clings, hoping to be noticed. Before we continue, I want you to pause and think about how this applies to your own journey. It's easy to fall into old patterns of reacting, explaining, or chasing. But real growth starts when you choose stillness over impulse. How have you handled moments when silence was your strongest response? Share your experience in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. Now, let's move on and explore what happens when you fully step into this calm, unshakable power. Number 5. You break the cycle of emotional validation. Most men, when faced with distance or silence from a woman, fall into a familiar trap. They start chasing answers. Why are you pulling away? Did I do something wrong? Can we talk? It's a desperate search for closure, for reassurance, for anything that soothes the discomfort of uncertainty. They hand over their power in exchange for a few words that might ease their mind, if only for a moment. But here's the hard truth. Every time you seek validation from someone who's pulling away, you reinforce the idea that your peace depends on their approval. But you're different. You recognize the trap for what it is, and you refuse to play that game. Instead of chasing emotional comfort, you master the art of restraint. You understand that true power isn't found in reacting to every shift in someone else's behavior. It's found in holding steady, especially when every part of you wants to act, to fix, to reach out. This is where Stoicism separates the average man from the disciplined one. Epictetus taught that freedom comes when you no longer allow external events to dictate your internal state. When she pulls away, when the silence stretches on, most men panic because they need that external validation to feel secure. But a Stoic man knows that the only validation worth having is the kind that comes from within. How many times have you seen guys lose their composure because they couldn't sit with uncertainty? They text paragraphs looking for answers. They beg for conversations that only diminish their value. All because they couldn't resist the impulse to do something. But real strength, the kind that commands respect, comes from being able to do nothing when nothing needs to be done. By choosing silence, by refusing to beg for clarity, you break that exhausting cycle. You show that you don't need her words to define your worth, nor do you fear the unknown. You embrace it. You let the silence be what it is, because you trust yourself to remain grounded regardless of how the situation unfolds. And here's the paradox. When you stop seeking validation, you often gain something far more valuable: respect, not just from her, but from yourself. You prove to yourself that you're not controlled by fleeting emotions or the need for constant reassurance. You stand firm, calm, and composed, even when it's uncomfortable. In the end, breaking the cycle of emotional validation isn't easy, but it's exactly what sets you apart. While others chase closure, you choose composure. And that choice defines the kind of man you are, the one who doesn't need to be told he's enough, because he already knows it. Number 6. She starts to wonder if you've moved on. Silence has a way of speaking directly to the mind, and it plants exactly the kind of doubt that makes her pause. When you don't reach out, when you don't react to her pulling away, a subtle but powerful question begins to echo in her thoughts. Has he moved on? At first, she might try to convince herself that you're just giving her space, that you'll eventually come back, like most men do. But as time passes and your silence holds, that confidence starts to fade, replaced by curiosity and eventually concern. She begins to wonder, are you still emotionally invested? Or have you realized that you don't need her validation anymore? That uncertainty can be far more impactful than any words you could have sent. Because now, instead of you wondering where you stand with her, she's the one questioning where she stands with you. This is where the strength of a self-sufficient man shines through. The Stoics taught that a wise man doesn't attach his peace to things outside his control, especially not to fleeting emotions or the approval of others. When you embody that mindset, you stop chasing what's temporary. You stop proving your worth to someone who's testing your patience or interest. Instead, you remain still, grounded, and focused on what truly matters: your own growth, purpose, and inner calm. And that stillness? It's magnetic. Not because you're trying to attract her back, but because true detachment radiates strength. She feels the shift, the absence of neediness, the absence of pursuit. Where she once felt certain of your attention, she now feels a void. And human nature hates a void. The mind starts to fill in the blanks, often with thoughts like, maybe he's moved on. What if someone else has his attention? Did I lose him by pulling away? But here's the key. You didn't stay silent to make her insecure. You stayed silent because you genuinely understand that a man who respects himself doesn't chase after someone who steps back. Like Marcus Aurelius advised, you act with intention, not reaction. You're not punishing her. You're simply showing that your life moves forward, with or without her presence. And ironically, it's when you no longer need her to notice you that she often starts to. Because nothing sparks curiosity more than a man who no longer fits into the narrative she expected. A man who doesn't come running, who doesn't seek validation, who seems free. So while she's sitting there wondering if you've emotionally detached, you're already ahead, because you have. Not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. You've embraced what the Stoics knew all along, that real power is in being content with yourself, in walking away from what no longer aligns with your peace. In the end, silence isn't just the absence of words, it's the presence of strength. And when you hold that kind of strength, you don't have to announce that you've moved on. She'll feel it. And that quiet realization, it's far louder than anything you could ever say. Number 7, you protect your dignity without a fight. Every message you don't send speaks louder than 1,000 words ever could. It says, "I respect myself too much to chase what's uncertain." You see, most men fall into the trap of thinking they need to fight for attention, to argue for their worth, or to convince someone to care. But true strength isn't found in forcing conversations or pleading for validation. It's found in knowing when to stay silent and let your absence speak for you. When she pulls away, the average man feels compelled to do something, to ask, to explain, to beg for clarity. But every time you resist that impulse, you're making a powerful statement. Your dignity is not up for negotiation. You don't need to prove your value to someone who's testing it. You don't need to lower yourself just to remain in someone's thoughts. By staying silent, you protect what so many men carelessly give away: their self-respect. Seneca once admired those who could endure without complaint, who valued themselves enough to walk away quietly from disrespect rather than engage in battles that diminish their character. That's exactly what you embody when you choose stillness over reaction. You're not retreating. You're standing tall in a way that doesn't require raising your voice or sending a desperate text. Think about it. Dignity doesn't beg. It doesn't chase after someone who's unsure. It doesn't need to defend itself in the face of indifference. When you stay silent, you're not ignoring her to punish her. You're honoring yourself. You're showing that your attention is a privilege, not something to be dragged out of you through emotional games. And here's the beauty of it. When you act with this kind of quiet strength, you never lose. Even if she never reaches out again, you walk away with your head high, knowing you didn't compromise who you are just to hold on to someone slipping away. That's a victory most men will never experience, because they're too busy fighting battles that should have been left in silence. You see, protecting your dignity isn't about pride. It's about knowing your worth without needing constant reminders from others. It's about understanding that sometimes the most powerful move is to not engage at all. In the end, you don't preserve your dignity by winning arguments or demanding attention. You preserve it by knowing when to step back, stay calm, and let your absence carry the message. I value myself too much to beg for a place where I'm not fully welcomed. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever chosen silence over reaction? And how did it shift the situation for you? Share your experience in the comments or simply type, "My silence protects my dignity," if you're embracing this mindset. Remember, every time you stay true to yourself, you're stepping into a strength most never discover. Now, let's keep going and explore what happens when this quiet power becomes a part of who you are. Number 8. Her perception of you evolves. When you stop reacting emotionally, something subtle but powerful begins to happen. You transform in her eyes. You're no longer the man who scrambles for answers, who rushes to fix the distance, or who lets his emotions dictate his actions. Instead, you become the man who holds his ground, calm, composed, and entirely unshaken. And trust me, she notices. At first, she might have expected the usual pattern: the emotional texts, the need for reassurance, the predictable response that so many men fall into when they feel a woman slipping away. But when you choose silence, when you show restraint and let the situation unfold without chasing, her entire perception of you begins to shift. You're no longer the man trying to win her back. You've become the man who respects himself enough to stay centered, regardless of what she does. This is where true respect is born. Not from words, but from behavior. A man who can stay still in emotional storms radiates a different kind of energy. It's the energy of someone who doesn't need to prove his worth, because his composure speaks for him. Like the Stoics taught, you embody the principle that real power lies in self-control, not in controlling others. She starts to see you differently. Not as someone who's easily swayed by emotions, but as someone who moves with intention. A man who doesn't flinch when faced with uncertainty. A man who knows that his value isn't diminished just because someone else becomes distant. And that calm, unbothered presence? It commands far more respect than any plea for attention ever could. People naturally respect what they can't easily rattle. When you were reactive, she may have seen you as emotionally dependent, always ready to chase or explain. But now, in your silence, she sees a man who's anchored. A man who doesn't just talk about confidence, he lives it. And here's the irony. When you stop seeking validation, when you no longer react out of fear or attachment, you become infinitely more attractive. Not because you're trying to be, but because few men possess that level of emotional discipline. You've shifted from being someone who needs her attention to someone who chooses where he gives his energy. So, while she's observing this new version of you, understand that this evolution isn't just for her to see, it's for you to live. You didn't change to get a reaction. You changed because you realized that a man who masters himself no longer plays by the old rules of emotional desperation. Number 9. You create space for genuine reconnection. Silence isn't a goodbye. It's an open space where something real can either grow or fade away as it should. Most men see silence as a loss, as if by not acting, they're letting everything slip through their fingers. But a wiser man, a Stoic man, understands that silence isn't about ending things. It's about removing the noise, the pressure, and the emotional chasing that suffocates genuine connection. When you stop reaching out, when you let go of the need to fix the distance, you create something rare: freedom. Freedom for her to choose whether she truly wants to come back, not because you persuaded her, guilted her, or begged her, but because, in that quiet space, she realized on her own that she values you. That kind of return, one made without pressure or expectation, is the only return that actually means something. You see, attraction that's forced is fragile. If you have to chase it, convince it, or constantly hold it together, it's already broken. The Stoics knew this well. Epictetus warned against trying to control outcomes that don't belong to us. When you try to force someone to stay, to talk, to reconnect, you might get a temporary response, but it comes at the cost of your self-respect and long-term stability. By staying silent, you're not closing the door. You're simply stepping back and allowing whatever is real to reveal itself. If she doesn't return, then you've learned the truth without having to exhaust yourself chasing it. But if she does, it's because she wanted to. not because you pulled her back. This space you've created, it's where authentic desire can rebuild. Without tension, without the imbalance of one person chasing while the other pulls away. It resets the dynamic. Now, if she reaches out, it's not out of obligation or manipulation. It's because your absence reminded her of your value, and she chose to bridge the gap. And here's where you continue to embody that stoic strength. Even if she does come back, you remain grounded. You don't treat her return as a victory, because you were never playing a game. You were simply living by a principle. What's meant for you will never require you to sacrifice your dignity to keep it. So, understand this. Your silence isn't a tactic. It's a reflection of trust. Trust in yourself, in the natural course of things, and in the belief that genuine connection doesn't need to be forced. It either flows back to you or it doesn't, and either outcome leaves you at peace. In the end, when you stop chasing, you don't lose control. You gain clarity. You give her the freedom to decide, and you give yourself the freedom from needing her decision to define your worth. That's how real reconnection happens, if it's meant to. And if not, you walk forward, knowing you never had to beg for something that wasn't truly yours. So, what really happens when you stay silent after she pulls away? You reclaim your power. You remind her, and more importantly, yourself, that you are not a man driven by fear, impulse, or neediness. You embody what few men ever master: emotional control, self-respect, and quiet strength. Remember, it's not about punishing her. It's about respecting yourself enough to let silence do what words never could. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to reflect. Have you been reacting or responding with discipline? Drop your thoughts in the comments, or simply type "Silence is strength" to let me know you're part of that rare breed of men who understand this power. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and check out the recommended videos on screen to continue building your mindset and mastering emotional control. Until next time, stay grounded, stay silent when needed, and never chase what should come to you freely.